morning, Iran is saying they plan to ignore uranium stockpile limits agreed to under that 2015 nuclear deal. Also, separately, President Trump lauding his poll numbers and firing his pollsters.
Team Rising is in the House. Andrew Feldman is a Democratic strategist, and Tom Rogan is a writer for the Washington Examiner. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you guys.
Let's begin with Iran. So the Secretary of State and Senator Tom Cotton making some hawkish news this morning. Let's take a listen to what the Secretary of State had to say on Face the Nation.
President Trump's been unambiguous. Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. That's the goal. That's the objective of our entire campaign with respect to Iran, and to create stability throughout the Middle East as part of that effort. We've taken a handful of those actions to increase the opportunity to convince Iran that these actions aren't in their best interest, and it appears to be Iran that wants to continue to escalate this conflict.
Correction, that was actually on Fox News Sunday. But Tom, to this point, Senator Tom Cotton also advocating, we talked about earlier in the show, for a retaliatory strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran for their alleged involvement in this attack on the commercial tankers. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think President Trump wants it to happen. It's been quite noticeable over the past month, especially the paring back of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's rhetoric on Iran. Originally, it was the 13 points that Iran had to conform to come back to the table. Now it's simply, let's talk about the nuclear issue. But I think what we will see is more efforts by the United States and its partners, including some of the European navies, to escort vessels through the Gulf of Oman into the Strait of Hormuz, and to say to the Iranians, if you cross into these essentially corridors of transit routes, you'll be fired upon. And I think that's probably the appropriate way to deal with this, because it balances the desire not to get involved in a military conflict with the need to get the Iranians to stop doing what they're doing.
Tom, can you just help us understand the Iranian mindset here? I mean, assuming they are responsible for these attacks, which is most likely, right? Why? What are they hoping to accomplish? What are they thinking in response to the, very aggressive actions that we've taken against their economy?
I think two things. I think they sense that being able to do this in a deniable way that falls short of mining the Strait of Hormuz, which was the traditional notion that what Iran would do if they faced the kind of sanctions pressure they were facing. They hope that by framing this, well, it's not us, creating a bit of doubt that gives the Europeans space to say to the Trump administration, well, we can't be certain. And also by attacking oil transit routes in this manner, that the Europeans are going to say to the Trump administration, somehow persuade President Trump, perhaps because of President Trump's interest in having a strong economy running into the election cycle. And the Iranians are keen strategic operators in this way. They will be thinking about that hopefully that pressure will be enough to get the Trump administration to say, maybe we're being a little bit too tough. I also think it's a function of necessity in the sense that our economy is imploding, and the hardliner element of the regime, in terms of the absence of revenue streams to fund their regional projects as much as anything else, they need to do something to alter the equation.
Right. Well, I mean, Andrew, speak to that, because their economy is not just imploding on its own. We are imploding their economy.
Correct. I mean, this doesn't surprise me that we're in an escalating situation with Iran. This has to do, in my opinion, with the Trump administration. We had a deal in 2015, the Iran nuclear deal that John Kerry, President Obama worked on for years. That came together, and of course, just because it is the MO of the Trump administration, we're going to get out of everything President Obama did, whether it's the climate accords or it's the Iran deal, and this is a result of, in my opinion, getting out of that deal. And now we're seeing an escalation and a volatile situation that it could lead to war. I don't think it will, but I just think it is silly that we broke out of this deal.
Well, there were a lot of good reasons to get out of that deal. But now, Tom, I'm curious on this. My thoughts on the uranium enrichment, their announcement that came out this morning, is that they are ratcheting up because they know that is the leverage that they have. It starts a ticking clock. They want to get another deal. Their economy is imploding. Again, I agree with you, Andrew. I don't think that war is actually the option. But by starting this clock, they want the Trump administration back at the table. What does a new deal look like with Iran? That's actually my question.
Benjamin Netanyahu is going to tell us.
Well, I think you would have three facets to it. You would have one, thing, which was a big problem originally in terms of the moral compass of the original deal, that a lot of the revenue streams went to elements associated with the IRGC in terms of regime industries, which clearly was not to the benefit of the people, certainly not to the benefit of the people in the region in terms of what that money then went to. Secondly, a longer term, a timeline that was not defined by 15 years, which creates essentially cutout clauses for the Iranians to do ballistic missile research. That is critical. We see that with North Korea as the example. You do not want the Iranians to build up the capability with ballistic missiles, which they have been doing. They say it's satellites as ballistic missiles, in lieu of nuclear weapons, so that they finally have the breakout point. I think those would be the three.
But I mean, is that realistic? Like, I mean, I want a pony and a unicorn, but I'm not getting them, either one. Like, I mean, you know, it's great that they want a better deal. I'm sure there were pieces of this deal that could have been optimized. However, have they really laid the groundwork to come out with something better than what we had?
I think you could get that deal for the simple reason that the more moderate bloc around President Rouhani, and this is where I would disagree with Secretary of State Pompeo and John Bolton, the idea that it's a unitary bloc. What I think President Trump's utility in saying to President Rouhani, I'm open to talking, is to split the hardliners away from the moderates, who know, ultimately, with that youth-bulge population and the economy in such a cataclysmic position, they need to cut a deal more on the American terms. The question is, how much do you... I think those three factors would be rational, but I get the...
Yeah, please.
Look, President Trump's touting a North Korea deal for years. He's touting a deal here. He's touting, he's touting a new deal every which way, right? I just don't think this is going to happen, right? I just think, again, my point is real about Benjamin Netanyahu. The reason that Trump was so hard against this, in my opinion, is because Benjamin Netanyahu, not all Israelis, by the way, but Benjamin Netanyahu was adamant against this, and it really hurt his relationship with President Obama at the end of his term. So I really do believe that President Trump would never support a deal that Israel wasn't behind, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, interesting. All right, a lot there. Let's take a look at some politics. Polling, new stuff. CBS has a new big battleground tracker out. They polled 18 different states. And the top line here, pretty interesting. This poll, like others, shows Warren pulling just ahead of Sanders within the margin of error, but still significant there. And they also did something else interesting, Andrew. They looked at, okay, if we were going to base delegate counts on this polling, what would that look like? And they've got Biden sitting on top at 731, and then you've got Warren 355 and Sanders 317. Number one, notable that Warren pulls ahead of Sanders, but number two, notable if you put those two sort of progressive, candidates, super progressive candidates together, you're basically sitting right at the same place that Biden is sitting at.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a long several months here, right? More than so, but I think it starts with the June 26th, 27th debates, right? We are going to see what happens to this vote, right? Warren has already been leapfrogging Sanders in a bunch of these recent polls. My question is, does Sanders hold on to what he has, or does he continue to drop and Warren continues to take that progressive support? I just think it's way too early for all of this, and the media loves these polls. Every week there's a new poll coming up because it starts a conversation.
Everybody loves these polls. Are you kidding me? We all love because polls. We're done. Have some
but
insight.
it's just so early. It's just so early, and it's just, if I always love to say this, if we were talking about this in 2007, Rudy Giuliani would have been president, right? So it's just
waiting for Florida.
Yeah, I mean, it's
all going to happen in
Florida. Once he decided to make that move to Florida, but point is here, it's just so early. I think this is fascinating, but the debates are going to bring up so much conversation and so many people to the forefront that people don't know who they are right now. A lot can change.
Tom, I actually do wonder about that point. Do the debates matter as much as they once did?
Yeah, that's a good
in the
question.
age of social media, in the age of the ricocheting of social media videos of each of these candidates, so much of them have massive name ID. They have their own distinct brands, their own distinct audience. does it actually matter as it once was? In other words, can we start to look at this and say, well, there is a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party that is going on in this, and it will be a long term. I think that's a useful insight.
I broadly agree with Andrew on that, but I think it does matter a lot for the simple reason that we saw in 2016. It wasn't so much that President Trump was able to win the base of the Republican Party. I mean, if we look at his various victories in each state in the primary race, there was still that constituency of other establishment Republicans who coalesced together could have beaten him.
Right.
But it did show those debates the weaknesses of the other Republican candidates, the apparent inability to take Trump on. And so if we see, for example, exchanges on the debate floor between Democrats who either come across as weak or hesitant or perhaps more conciliatory towards President Trump, things that I think Democrats with their not necessarily high regard for President Trump would want to see, then there is ammunition there to jockey up this extremely competitive race.
And
That's a good point.
I don't think anyone has more at stake in these debates than Joe Biden. Because, I mean, his team has kept his schedule very light. When he has given speeches and made policy pronouncements in particular, it hasn't gone that well. We had Cenk Uygur on last week. He said that every time Biden says something about policy, his poll numbers drop,
right.
which has kind of been true up to this point. But, I mean, people are supporting Biden because they think he's the most electable and because they have this, like, fuzzy, warm feeling about his time with Obama. But if he gets up on stage and he doesn't look like he's cutting mustard, that's going to be a big problem.
Yeah. The thing is, this isn't about Obama anymore, right? Once Joe Biden takes that stage, this is about Joe Biden's record and Joe Biden's the candidate. What I do think we need to remember, and didn't necessarily help him in 2007 but he participated in something like 10 debates with that large field in 2007, 2008. What is interesting here is that Joe Biden has always been a good debater. He was a good debater in the VP debates in both sets, 2008, 2012. And there's a video probably somewhere archived on YouTube from the Democratic primaries in 2007. And it's all about the other candidates saying, Joe's right, Joe's right, Joe's right. He's hoping for that moment again because now he's the front runner, not trying to get to the bottom, up to the top of the pack. I'm not sure that's going to happen. It's going to be interesting though, because if you think about the CNN town halls, 1 million, maybe 2 million people at best watch those, and they vaulted people to the top, right? Like people who judge it, Mayor Pete specifically. So I think viral moments in these town halls these debates could really shake up the field.
That's a good point too. We also, the president was taking issue with some of the polling numbers on his own thing. I believe he tweeted about it over the weekend, but he also fired some of his internal pollsters because he's dissatisfied. So while it's important to look at the top line numbers coming out of the Democratic Party, curious to see the head-to-head matchups on all of these are not good for Trump, right, Tom? Or is it just too early to look at these and glean any sort of useful insight?
I think it's way too early.
Yeah.
And I think, in the same reason we saw this in 2016, but now, a lot of people don't know about the policy details of these various candidates. And I think beyond Joe Biden, there is certainly a lot of people when they started reading into the cost implications who would have a moment of pause. Right. Certainly President Trump's strongest factor is the strength of the economy. I think he needs that to sustain. But it is too early. And it'll be, I think his opportunity as well, as much as he is clearly freaking out about Joe Biden, as is his team, that as the Democratic primary race continues and as candidates outdo each other to try and steal some of the glory, the better angels of Bernie's nature in a way, at least in policy issues, they potentially move themselves too far to the left. Or there's a vulnerability there that he can take advantage of.
There's a worry also that we beat each other up for too long and he I don't think we're going to give him a free pass, but that we're really damaged and can't come united into the general, which we need to beat him. These polls, I cringe when my friends call me and say, oh my God, did you see Joe Biden's beating Trump in Texas? Hillary Clinton was beating him all over the place, right? And we lost. We got to realize we cannot get complacent here and think that this guy is the manipulator in chief. He is going to turn that on like never seen before, and I am worried that can bring him to victory if we get complacent. We need to make sure that we do not take anything for granted, and most of all, going into a general election, that we are more united than we ever are before, and that's a worry.
Tom, that is something I think about, is this time he has the full federal government apparatus behind him. Yeah. So last time we heard the lock her up chants, but they were just chants, right? He wasn't running the Justice Department. What sort? You just know that we are going to see tactics that we have never imagined before, and I think that's one of the things that we have to take into account here.
Well, I don't think the idea that, for example, he's going to do something. I think he'd like to do some slightly interesting things. I think he is constrained by the institutions and offices of government. I think sometimes Democrats freak out too much about that. I also think, as much as you're right that he has the podium now, right, to be able to generate more news. What he has to face as well is the sense of passion that Democratic operatives like Andrew have, and you see just this relentless, we cannot have this happen again. Like the 24-hour, relentless, we have got to defeat Trump. There is no complacency now. And I think that Democratic energy is something that is going to be an equal challenge to him.
Yeah, that's interesting. Gentlemen, thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Coming up, millions of protesters take to the streets in Hong Kong, forcing the stall of some controversial extradition legislation there. And also, 25 years after the infamous white Ford Bronco chase, O.J. Simpson, he's on Twitter.
The juice is back. And a province in Pakistan has filters on for a government meeting, just not the type that you might imagine. Those are the stories before we go.